I'm interviewing Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who was a colleague of mine at the UN for nearly 9 years. Brilliant academic background. I told him that he got his PhD almost before I was out of short trousers academically. Did it simultaneously with a master's. Scintillating mind, scintillating eloquence, brilliant career at the United Nations, very close aide to Kofi Annan, Under Secretary General for Information, Public Information, candidate for Secretary General of the United Nations, then into politics in India, Deputy Foreign Minister, now in opposition but still a Member of Parliament for his home constituency. Shashi, that's quite a lot, isn't it?
That's very generous of you.
To fit into not that many years.
Oh, quite a few years now. I'm afraid one is a bit long in the tooth, but I'm very touched that you summarised it so nicely. It's a kind of thing that my late father would have been so happy to hear, but only my mother would have believed. Put it all together that way without any of the setbacks, of which there have been a few. But yes, touch wood, that's where I am, and I chair our Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee and get to look at the world a bit as well.
So what are you focusing on particularly? Which areas or which issues?
Well, actually, one doesn't have the luxury of specialising in that kind of position. So as an MP and as chairman of the committee, the world is my sort of oyster. We on the committee have also been concerned with India's readiness to take on the world of the 21st century. And so there's been quite a few sessions with the Foreign Secretary on things like the structure of the service, recruitment patterns, the need for lateral entry, the need to get an expertise, issues like that, not just the usual substantive issues, of which I'm afraid the most prominent ones get the most attention. Relations with China, with Pakistan, with the United States typically have tended to dominate many of the hearings so far in my 1 year and a bit of chairmanship.
Do you take an interest in any specific conflicts around the world? Well,
I think our problem has been our own immediate backyard more than anything else. So no, we haven't actually, other than just getting briefings on and asking questions to the concerned officials and diplomats about what's going on in the Middle East, ISIS, the Indian hostages who've been taken in the Middle East and so on. We haven't really, for example, we've had no hearing on Ukraine yet. There just hasn't been much of a demand for it. We've tended to focus in India on things of more immediate concern. The Middle East is of immediate concern. It tends to affect us, and many of our citizens have been directly caught up in it. Pakistan remains an immediate issue. The successful land boundary agreement with Bangladesh was another major concern of ours soon after this Parliament was constituted, because it required a constitutional amendment which had to go through our committee first. And I was able to help structure an agreement amongst all the parties represented on the committee, and we now have that agreement ratified by Parliament. So it's a very, very significant development in terms of stabilising a long-running dispute is too dramatic a word, but an unresolved issue of partition 70 years almost later. Pakistan remains the biggest worry, where of course there has been very little progress, and even as we speak today the news has come in that Pakistan has called off talks between the national security advisors that were slated to take place in Delhi tomorrow. So that remains the tense relationship, another legacy of partition.
We'll get on to that in a minute. Shashi, you mentioned the Middle East. I used to read comments by some of the more radical movements in the Middle East on the Arab and Palestinian side about the Hindu Zionist, or the alleged Hindu Zionist conspiracy. Exactly. Is that still a kind of extant accusation, and how does India deal with it?
Well, it is part of the explicit manifestos of both Al Qaeda and ISIS. I mean Daesh. They have explicitly clubbed India together with Israel. This may have helped us get a lot of counter-terrorism cooperation from the Israelis, as a matter of fact. They have been very helpful, and particularly in some of their techniques and some of their technologies. I'm sorry, this wind is
I'm very jealous of the full head of hair.
Well, this is a moment for me to be jealous of your lack of it. But anyway.
Oh, come on. You shouldn't have mentioned my lack of it, but anyway, please. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, I just want to say that this remains an issue. India is actually a bit miffed about it because we're rather proud of having had good relations with the Arab world since independence, and having been an early supporter and advocate of the Palestinian cause. We in fact voted against the creation of Israel at the United Nations. But we have become closer to Israel in the last 25 years or so. This has involved particularly cooperation on the defense and counter-terrorism spheres. Israel is now the third largest supplier of defense equipment to India after the US and Russia. So it's actually a very significant player for us, and I suppose that underscores the reasons why some of these Islamist radicals or fanatics or whatever one wants to call them have chosen to target us. But my own view is that a lot of this is rhetorical, that it's not entirely based on an organized plan of action against India. That tends to originate in Pakistan rather than in more distant, from more distant sources. I think the rhetoric of Hinduism and Zionism is all very well, but as you know, neither Daesh nor Al-Qaeda have actually managed to attack Israel yet. And the attacks we have recorded on Indian soil have all emanated from Pakistan and not from the Middle East.
Despite your protestations to the contrary, you're still a relatively young man, particularly in Indian politics, where as far as I can see you're a teenager until you're at least 70.
That's right.
What are your remaining political ambitions? How do you see the future shaping up for
Well,
Dr.
at the
Shashi
moment,
Tharoor?
Kieran, you know, my party is reduced to 44 seats in a 543-seat parliament, so it would be foolhardy in the extreme to articulate very soaring ambitions. I do think we will bounce back in the next election, which is still 4 years away, largely because the government is in the process of squandering its majority through a year of relative inaction, accompanied by wonderful speeches and sound bites and photo ops, but simply not translating that into anything implementable or with a credible budget attached, with the result that disappointment is beginning to mount across the country. So I am increasingly of the view that my party will do much better in the next election. If we were to come back to government, obviously that's my dream would be to try and make a difference in whatever portfolio I might be assigned. Ultimately, I can't really project more than that. I might end up, in fact, either being the voice of a still opposition opposition bench party, or I might find myself at the wrong end of the electoral result next time around. So in politics, typically none of us thinks very much beyond the next election.
Now, last question. Where does Beyond Borders come in? Where do you see the link?
Well, Beyond Borders,
very good to have you here with us.
It's wonderful to be here. It's my first appearance at Beyond Borders. I hope it won't be the last. Apart from the magnificent and tranquil setting, which is so far removed from my sort of daily life and sort of theatre of action, I have to say that the mix of people such as yourselves from my UN past, writers, intellectuals who've gathered here, are both a reminder of some of the urgent issues that frankly justify for me why I am in public life in the first place. But secondly, help create a new network of relationships, not just with those who are speaking, but also with some who have attended. I've met a couple of people from the audience who've come up to me who are engaged in rather interesting projects which they'd like to connect to India, and they'd like to be in touch with me. And so I expect that some of the connections made at Beyond Borders will continue beyond Borders, and that Beyond Borders itself gives me an opportunity, of course, to engage with a very interesting audience on issues that I hope that certainly matter to me and I hope will matter to them.
Thank you very much, Shashi. Good to have you with us.